The Second World War was the most destructive conflict in human history. Between 1939 and 1945, it consumed the globe, drew in more than 60 nations, and killed over 70 million people. It was not a single war, but a clash of ideologies, economies, and empires that played out on every continent. Its roots stretched back decades before the first shots were fired, and its consequences reached far beyond its end. The First World War had left Europe broken. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, was intended to bring peace but instead sowed resentment. Germany was stripped of territory, forbidden to maintain a large army, and forced to pay crushing reparations. Its people felt humiliated, betrayed, and desperate for renewal. That humiliation created fertile soil for extremism. Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party rose by promising to restore national pride, rebuild the military, and destroy the so-called enemies who had weakened Germany. At the same time, fascism spread beyond Germany. In Italy, Benito Mussolini had already taken power in the 1920s, building a dictatorship that glorified violence and conquest. Japan, too, was expanding its empire, seizing Manchuria in 1931 and invading China in 1937. These regimes believed in domination, not cooperation, and they were willing to destroy anyone who stood in their way. The spark came on September 1, 1939. German troops crossed into Poland, using a new strategy called blitzkrieg, or lightning war. Tanks, artillery, aircraft, and infantry moved together with terrifying speed. Villages and cities collapsed in days. Britain and France declared war on Germany, honoring their alliance with Poland, but they could do little to stop the invasion. By the end of the month, Poland was divided, its people crushed between Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, which had agreed to partition the country under the secret Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. In the months that followed, the world entered what was called the Phony War. On the Western Front, there was little fighting, but in April 1940, Germany struck again. Denmark and Norway fell quickly. In May, German armies swept through the Low Countries and into France. The speed of their attack shocked the world. French defenses collapsed, and British forces retreated in chaos to the beaches of Dunkirk. There, in a desperate evacuation, more than 300,000 troops were rescued by a flotilla of naval vessels and civilian boats. Though France soon surrendered, Britain lived to fight another day. The Battle of Britain began in the summer of 1940. German bombers filled the skies, seeking to crush the Royal Air Force and prepare the way for an invasion. Night after night, London and other cities were bombed in what became known as the Blitz. Entire neighborhoods were reduced to rubble, but the spirit of the British people endured. The Royal Air Force fought with determination, aided by new technologies like radar. By October, Hitler abandoned plans to invade. Britain had survived, but the war was only beginning. In 1941, Hitler turned east. On June 22, he launched Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in history. 3 million German soldiers crossed into the Soviet Union, driving deep into its territory. At first, the advance was rapid. Kiev, Smolensk, and hundreds of towns fell. Millions of Soviet soldiers were killed or captured. Civilians endured massacres and starvation as German troops swept forward. Yet the Soviet Union did not collapse. Harsh winters, vast distances, and fierce resistance slowed the invaders. By December, German forces reached the gates of Moscow, but they were exhausted, ill-equipped for the cold, and unprepared for Soviet counterattacks. The Red Army pushed them back, proving that Hitler's war in the East would not be quick or easy. As Germany fought in the Soviet Union, the war spread across the globe. In Asia, Japan continued its conquests. Its armies had already captured large parts of China, where atrocities such as the Nanjing massacre revealed the brutality of its campaign. Seeking resources, Japan turned toward Southeast Asia and the Pacific. To secure its advance, it decided to strike at the United States. On December 7, 1941, Japanese aircraft attacked Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, sinking battleships and killing thousands. The surprise attack brought America fully into the war. The Pacific now became a vast battlefield. Within months, Japan seized the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, and Indonesia. Its empire stretched across the Pacific, but its success would not last. In June 1942, at the Battle of Midway, American carriers ambushed the Japanese fleet, sinking 4 aircraft carriers and shifting the balance of naval power. From then on, the Allies moved steadily forward, island by island, through battles that claimed tens of thousands of lives. While these campaigns raged, Africa and the Mediterranean became another theater of war. German General Erwin Rommel, known as the Desert Fox, led his forces in daring maneuvers across North Africa. British and Commonwealth troops fought back, and in 1942, at El Alamein, they achieved a decisive victory. Soon after, American forces landed in Morocco and Algeria, beginning the liberation of North Africa. By 1943, the tide of war was turning. The Soviet victory at Stalingrad marked a crucial shift. For months, German and Soviet soldiers fought house by house in brutal combat. The city was reduced to rubble, but the Soviets refused to yield. When winter came, they encircled the German 6th Army, forcing its surrender. Hundreds of thousands of German soldiers were killed or captured. It was a devastating blow to Hitler's ambitions and a symbol of Soviet resilience. At the same time, the Allies invaded Italy. Mussolini was overthrown, but German forces resisted fiercely in the mountains and cities. The campaign dragged on, costing countless lives, but it weakened Axis control in Europe. In the skies, Allied bombers pounded German cities and industry, seeking to cripple the enemy's ability to fight. Cities like Hamburg and Dresden suffered devastating firestorms, killing tens of thousands in single nights. The destruction was immense, raising questions about the morality of such tactics, but the pressure on Germany was relentless. Life under occupation was harsh across Europe. In France, Poland, the Netherlands, and elsewhere, people lived under constant fear. The Gestapo hunted resistance fighters, and collaborators enforced Nazi rule. Yet resistance grew. Underground networks carried messages, sabotaged railways, and smuggled Jews and Allied soldiers to safety. In occupied countries, ordinary people risked everything to fight back, often at the cost of their lives. The war was also fought in secret laboratories and offices. Scientists and engineers developed new technologies, tanks, planes, submarines, and weapons of immense power. British codebreakers at Bletchley Park cracked the German Enigma code, giving the Allies crucial intelligence. Espionage, sabotage, and deception became as vital as battles in the field. Meanwhile, the Holocaust spread. From the invasion of Poland onward, Nazi policies targeted Jews, Romani people, political dissidents, and others deemed undesirable. Ghettos confined entire communities, forcing them into starvation and disease. Mass shootings executed thousands at a time. From 1942, extermination camps like Auschwitz, Treblinka, and Sobibor became centers of industrialized murder. Millions were gassed, burned, and buried in pits. Families were torn apart, and centuries of culture were destroyed. The Holocaust was one of the most systematic and horrifying crimes in history. By 1944, the Allies were preparing to liberate Western Europe. Operation Overlord, known as D-Day, began on June 6. In the largest amphibious invasion ever launched, American, British, Canadian, and other Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy. Facing heavy fire, they fought their way inland. Within weeks, hundreds of thousands of soldiers were ashore. Paris was liberated in August, and Allied armies advanced toward Germany. On the Eastern Front, the Soviets launched massive offensives, driving German forces back through Ukraine, Poland, and the Balkans. The Red Army advanced relentlessly, pushing closer to Berlin. By late 1944, Germany was on the defensive, its armies battered on all fronts. Yet Hitler refused to surrender. In December, he launched one final offensive in the Ardennes, known as the Battle of the Bulge. American forces were surprised, but they held firm. After weeks of fighting in bitter cold, the Germans were pushed back. The offensive had failed, and Germany had spent its last reserves. By early 1945, the Third Reich was collapsing. On the Eastern Front, the Soviet Red Army had crossed into German territory. Cities that had once seemed untouchable were now under siege. In the West, American, British, Canadian, and French forces pushed steadily across the Rhine River into the heart of Germany. The once unstoppable Nazi war machine was now fighting for survival on two fronts. The Allied bombing campaigns intensified. Day and night, bombers rained destruction on German factories, railways, and oil facilities. Cities burned under relentless air raids. Dresden, a city of art and culture, was engulfed in a firestorm in February 1945. Tens of thousands were killed in a single night, their bodies consumed by flames so hot they created whirlwinds of fire. The devastation was shocking, even to those who carried out the raids, but the strategy aimed to break Germany's capacity to fight. Meanwhile, in the east, the Soviets fought through Poland, liberating Warsaw and uncovering the horrors of Nazi death camps. When Soviet soldiers entered Auschwitz in January 1945, they found starving prisoners, piles of corpses, and warehouses filled with the belongings of the murdered. The scale of the genocide stunned even hardened soldiers. The world would only later grasp the full magnitude of the Holocaust, but these first discoveries revealed a crime beyond comprehension. As Allied forces advanced, Germany's leaders clung to illusions. Adolf Hitler, hiding in his bunker beneath Berlin, issued orders detached from reality. He demanded counterattacks with divisions that no longer existed. His closest advisors plotted escape, while others began to surrender. In April 1945, the Soviets launched their final assault on Berlin. The battle was apocalyptic. Street by street, building by building, Soviet troops fought against desperate German defenders. The city that had once symbolized Nazi power was reduced to rubble. On April 30th, Hitler took his own life in the bunker along with his new wife, Eva Braun. His death marked the end of the Nazi regime, though fighting continued for a few more days. On May 7th, Germany surrendered unconditionally. In Europe, the war was over. Victory in Europe Day, or V-Day, was celebrated across the continent. People filled the streets in London, Paris, and New York, rejoicing at the end of nearly 6 years of war. But in Asia, the war continued. Japan's empire still stretched across much of East and Southeast Asia, and its armies remained formidable. Despite losing ground, Japan fought with ferocity. In battles like Iwo Jima and Okinawa, American forces encountered defenders who preferred death to surrender. Kamikaze pilots dove their planes into Allied ships, killing themselves in desperate attempts to inflict damage. The cost of each battle grew higher. On Okinawa alone, more than 200,000 soldiers and civilians died in a struggle that lasted nearly 3 months. The brutality of the Pacific War was unmatched. In China, millions had already died under Japanese occupation. The Nanjing Massacre of 1937, in which tens of thousands of civilians were slaughtered, was just one example of the terror inflicted. Prisoners of war were often executed or forced into slave labor. Civilians endured famine, disease, and fear. The war in Asia was not only a clash of armies but a tragedy that consumed entire populations. By mid-1945, Japan's situation was desperate. Its navy was destroyed, its cities were burning under American bombing raids, and its supply lines were cut. Yet its leaders refused to surrender. In March, Tokyo suffered one of the deadliest air raids in history. American B-29 bombers dropped incendiary bombs that created a firestorm, killing more than 100,000 people in a single night. Other cities suffered similar destruction. By summer, much of Japan lay in ruins. Still, its government vowed to fight on, preparing civilians to resist invasion with bamboo spears if necessary. The United States faced a terrible choice. An invasion of Japan, codenamed Operation Downfall, was expected to cost hundreds of thousands of American lives and perhaps millions of Japanese lives. At the same time, American scientists had developed a new weapon. The Manhattan Project, a massive secret program, had created the atomic bomb. Tested in the desert of New Mexico in July 1945, it unleashed an explosion unlike anything seen before. President Harry Truman now held the power to end the war in a single stroke, but at a cost no one could fully predict. On August 6, 1945, an American B-29 bomber named Enola Gay dropped the first atomic bomb on the city of Hiroshima. In a blinding flash, the city was destroyed. Tens of thousands were killed instantly. Buildings vaporized, shadows were burned into walls, and survivors suffered horrific burns. Fires raged across the ruins, and radiation poisoned the living. 3 days later, on August 9, a second bomb was dropped on Nagasaki, killing tens of thousands more. The devastation was beyond imagination. Faced with annihilation, Japan surrendered on August 15. The Second World War was finally over. Across the world, celebrations erupted. Crowds filled the streets in joy, relief, and exhaustion. Yet beneath the cheers lay grief for the millions who would never return. The cost of the war was staggering. More than 70 million people had died. Entire cities were obliterated. Families were torn apart, cultures destroyed, and landscapes scarred. Europe lay in ruins, with millions homeless and starving. In Asia, entire regions were devastated by occupation, famine, and combat. The war had redrawn borders, shattered empires, and shifted the balance of global power. In the aftermath, the victors sought justice. The Nuremberg trials, held in Germany, prosecuted Nazi leaders for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. For the first time, international law recognized that individuals, not just nations, could be held accountable for atrocities. The world saw evidence of the Holocaust laid bare: films, documents, testimonies, and the haunted faces of survivors. The trials established a precedent for accountability, though many perpetrators escaped justice. In Japan, similar trials were held in Tokyo. Military leaders and officials were prosecuted for crimes committed during the war, including the brutal treatment of prisoners and civilians. Yet, as in Europe, not all were punished. Some were spared in the interest of political stability or Cold War strategy. The aftermath of the war also reshaped the world. The United Nations was created in 1945, an attempt to prevent such a catastrophe from happening again. It aimed to provide a forum for nations to resolve disputes peacefully, though its effectiveness would be tested repeatedly. The war also accelerated decolonization. European empires, weakened and bankrupt, could no longer maintain control over their colonies. In Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, movements for independence gained momentum. India, Indonesia, and dozens of other nations would achieve freedom in the years that followed. The war also marked the beginning of the nuclear age. The atomic bomb had ended the conflict but unleashed new fears. The United States and the Soviet Union, once allies, now emerged as rivals. Their competition for power and influence created a new era, the Cold War. For decades, the world lived under the shadow of nuclear weapons, a legacy of the war that had just ended. The impact of World War II reached into every corner of society. Women had entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers, filling roles left vacant by men at war. Many found empowerment, though after the war, they were often pressured to return to traditional roles. Science and technology advanced rapidly, driven by the demands of war. Radar, jet engines, rocketry, and medicine all leapt forward, shaping the modern world. Culturally, the war left deep scars. Literature, film, and art struggled to express the scale of trauma. Survivors of concentration camps and battlefields carried memories too painful to share, yet their testimonies became essential to understanding what had happened. Generations grew up in the shadow of a war that had reshaped nations, families, and identities. World War II was not just a conflict of armies but a turning point in human history. It revealed both the heights of human courage and the depths of human cruelty. It showed how fragile peace can be and how costly its loss becomes. Its legacy remains in the institutions we built, the lessons we try to teach, and the memories we must never forget. The guns of the Second World War fell silent in 1945, but its echoes carried far beyond the battlefield. The war was not only a clash of nations but a turning point that reshaped the world order, redrew borders, and transformed societies. Its aftermath was complex, filled with both hope and fear, as humanity sought to rebuild from the ashes of the deadliest conflict in history. The devastation of Europe was almost unimaginable. Cities lay in ruins, industries destroyed, and millions of people displaced. Refugees wandered across borders, searching for lost families or new homes. Bombed-out neighborhoods became temporary shelters, while food shortages left millions malnourished. In Germany, entire towns had been flattened. In Poland and the Soviet Union, villages were wiped from the map. The continent faced not just physical destruction but moral and psychological scars. To prevent another global conflict, the Allies created the United Nations in October 1945. Its founding charter pledged to maintain peace, promote human rights, and encourage cooperation among nations. Though far from perfect, the UN became a symbol of hope that the world might avoid repeating the mistakes that had led to 2 world wars in just 3 decades. The Nuremberg and Tokyo trials, where leaders were prosecuted for crimes against humanity, reinforced the idea that law must extend even to the most powerful. Yet peace was fragile. The alliance that had defeated Nazi Germany soon fractured. The United States and the Soviet Union emerged as superpowers, their ideologies in direct opposition. The Cold War began almost immediately, with Europe divided into spheres of influence. In the West, democratic governments rebuilt with American aid through the Marshall Plan, which poured billions into reconstruction. In the East, Soviet-controlled regimes established communist states. The Iron Curtain fell across Europe, and the continent became the front line of a new struggle. The atomic bomb, which had ended the war in Japan, cast a long shadow. Its power terrified the world, and both the United States and the Soviet Union raced to build more. Nuclear weapons became the currency of power, ensuring that future wars carried the threat of annihilation. The arms race defined global politics for decades, with entire populations living under the possibility of sudden destruction. The Cold War was a direct legacy of World War II, shaped by the technologies and alliances born in its final years. But the war's impact was not only geopolitical. It transformed societies at home. Women, who had entered factories and offices during the war, discovered new independence. Though many were pushed back into traditional roles afterward, the experience planted seeds of social change that would later grow into movements for equality. Soldiers returned home carrying trauma, and the field of psychiatry struggled to understand what we now call post-traumatic stress. The stories of survivors, whether from battlefields or concentration camps, revealed the deep psychological costs of global conflict. Science had advanced rapidly during the war, driven by necessity. Radar, sonar, jet engines, and rockets reshaped technology. Medicine advanced too, with the widespread use of antibiotics like penicillin saving countless lives. These innovations spilled into civilian life after the war, accelerating the pace of change in the modern world. Even space exploration was rooted in wartime research. German scientists, captured after the war, helped launch the space programs of both the United States and the Soviet Union. Culturally, the war left indelible marks. Literature, film, and art grappled with its horrors. Writers like Anne Frank, whose diary gave a voice to the Holocaust, personalized suffering for millions of readers. Films captured both the heroism of soldiers and the trauma of survivors. Museums and memorials were built to preserve memory, ensuring that the atrocities would not be forgotten. Yet for many, silence dominated. Survivors often struggled to speak of what they had endured, their memories too painful to share until decades later. The war also accelerated the collapse of empires. European powers, weakened and bankrupt, could no longer maintain their colonies. Movements for independence gained strength across Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. In India, the war had stretched British resources thin, and by 1947, independence was achieved. In Indonesia, Vietnam, and dozens of other nations, colonial rule gave way to struggles for self-determination. Decolonization was one of the most profound transformations of the post-war world, and it was made possible in part by the weakening of imperial powers during the conflict. In Germany, the legacy of the war was felt most intensely. The nation was divided into 4 occupation zones, controlled by the United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, and France. Berlin, though deep inside the Soviet zone, was also divided. This division hardened into the separate states of East and West Germany, symbolizing the broader divide of the Cold War. The people of Germany lived with the burden of responsibility for the crimes of the Nazi regime, as well as the destruction left behind by defeat. Japan, too, faced transformation. Under American occupation, it adopted a new constitution, renounced war, and rebuilt its economy. The devastation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki left scars, but the nation emerged as a powerful industrial society in the decades that followed. The occupation restructured politics, society, and culture, leaving legacies that still shape Japan today. The memory of the Holocaust reshaped global awareness of human rights. The establishment of Israel in 1948 was influenced by the trauma of Jewish refugees and survivors. The phrase "it never again" became a rallying cry, though tragically, genocide would not disappear from the world. Still, the lessons of the Holocaust and the trials at Nuremberg set standards for international justice that continue to guide human rights efforts. For ordinary people, the war was not just a chapter in history but a defining experience. Families mourned those who never returned. Veterans carried memories of battlefields for the rest of their lives. Children who grew up in bombed-out cities remembered hunger, fear, and loss. The war touched every life in some way, creating a generation marked by sacrifice and survival. Economically, the war reshaped industries and trade. In the United States, wartime production had ended the Great Depression, and after the war, the nation emerged as the world's leading economic power. Europe rebuilt slowly but steadily, aided by American investment. In Asia, economies struggled to recover from occupation and destruction. The contrast between nations shaped global politics, with wealth and influence concentrated in the superpowers. World War II also forced a reckoning with science and ethics. The atomic bomb raised questions about humanity's capacity for self-destruction. Experiments conducted during the war, including unethical medical research by Nazi doctors and Japanese units, highlighted the need for strict ethical standards. The Nuremberg Code, established after the trials, laid the foundation for modern medical ethics, ensuring that consent and human dignity became central to research. In the decades that followed, the legacy of World War II continued to influence decisions. The alliances formed during the war became the basis for NATO and other organizations. The strategies developed in wartime shaped Cold War policies. Conflicts in Korea, Vietnam, and beyond were fought in the shadow of the lessons, and sometimes the mistakes, of the Second World War. Even today, the memory of World War II shapes our understanding of conflict, justice, and peace. It is studied in schools, depicted in films, and remembered in ceremonies around the world. Veterans and survivors, fewer with each passing year, carry living memories that remind us of the cost of war. Their stories, preserved in recordings and writings, remain vital warnings. The Second World War was not just a conflict of armies and nations. It was a struggle over the future of humanity. It revealed the capacity for both immense cruelty and extraordinary courage. It reshaped borders, societies, and lives on a scale that remains unmatched. Its legacy is all around us, in the institutions that govern the world, in the technologies we use, and in the freedoms many enjoy today. The war ended more than 70 years ago, yet it is not truly past. Its lessons remain urgent. The dangers of unchecked aggression, of hatred and prejudice, of indifference to suffering, all were written in fire and blood between 1939 and 1945. To forget them is to risk repeating them. The Second World War stands as a testament to humanity's darkest hours and its most resilient triumphs. It reminds us of what was lost, what was gained, and what must never be repeated. It is not simply history, it is a warning, a legacy, and a call to remember.